There is a kind of love that cannot be measured in grand gestures or expensive gifts. It is a quiet love, a patient love, a love that shows itself in small payments made week after week, in sacrifices that are never spoken of, in the determination to give your children joy even when joy seems like a luxury you cannot afford. This is the love of Layaway. If you grew up in a black household in the 1970s, 1980s, or early 1990s, you know this love intimately. You may not have understood it at the time. You may have been too young to comprehend what it meant when Mama disappeared every Friday afternoon, what she was doing at the K-Mart or the Woolworth or the Sears at the edge of town, but you understand it now. Now, with the wisdom of years and the perspective of adulthood, you understand that those weekly trips were acts of devotion, that the layaway counter was an altar where your mother made offerings of $5, $10, whatever she could spare, all in the name of making Christmas morning magical for you. This is the story of Layaway Christmas. This is the story of the mothers who stood in those lines. This is the story of the children who woke up on December 25th and never knew, could never have known, the months of planning and sacrifice that made their happiness possible. It always began with the catalog. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, sometimes even before, the catalogs would arrive. They came in the mail, thick as telephone books, their covers glossy with images of perfect families gathered around perfect Christmas trees, surrounded by perfect gifts wrapped in perfect paper. J.C. Penney, Sears, Montgomery Ward, service merchandise, each one a doorway to a world of possibility, a world
Mom,
where everything
look,
was beautiful
it's the new
and nothing
Transformers.
cost too much.
I really want that
The children
one.
would seize these catalogs the moment they arrived, would spread them out on the living room floor, would spend hours turning pages and pointing and dreaming. I want this, they would say, circling items with pencil or pen, folding down corners of pages, creating wish lists that grew longer with each passing day. Mama would watch from her chair, her face a careful mask of neutrality. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She simply watched and listened and made mental notes, calculating prices, comparing options, figuring out what was possible and what was not. The children's lists were ambitious, innocent of economic reality. They wanted the big things, the expensive things, the things they saw advertised on television during Saturday morning cartoons. They wanted the Cabbage Patch Kids and the Transformers and the Atari game systems. They wanted bicycles with banana seats and televisions for their bedrooms and boomboxes with dual cassette decks. They wanted everything, because children always want everything, because wanting is free even when having is not. Mama would wait until the children were in bed, and then she would retrieve the catalogs from wherever they had been left. She would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a calculator, and she would begin the real work of Christmas. She would look at the circled items in the folded pages, and she would make decisions that would never be discussed, sacrifices that would never be acknowledged. The Atari was too expensive. But perhaps there was a handheld game, something smaller, something that would still bring joy without breaking the budget. The bicycle was out of reach. But perhaps there was a skateboard, or a pair of roller skates, something with wheels that could be wrapped and placed under the tree. The Cabbage Patch Kid was sold out everywhere anyway, but perhaps there was a similar doll, something with soft body and plastic head, something that a child could love just as much. These were the calculations of Layaway Christmas. These were the equations that balanced desire against reality, dreams against dollars, what children wanted against what mothers could provide. The layaway counter was always at the back of the store. You had to walk past the gleaming displays of merchandise, past the mannequins in their fine clothes, past the toys arranged in elaborate pyramids, past all the things you could not afford to buy outright. The layaway counter was where you went when you didn't have enough money to pay all at once, when you needed time to gather the funds, when you wanted something badly enough to commit to paying for it piece by piece over weeks or months. Mama knew this walk well. She had made it many times before, in many different stores, for many different reasons. But the walk to Layaway at Christmas time was different. This walk was sacred. This walk was a pilgrimage. This walk was the first step in a journey that would end on Christmas morning with children's faces lit up with joy. The woman behind the layaway counter knew Mama, too. In small towns and tight-knit neighborhoods, the layaway clerks knew all the regular customers. They knew who paid on time and who needed reminders. They knew who was buying for how many children and who had been coming for how many years. They were the keepers of secrets, the guardians of Christmas dreams, and they treated their role with the seriousness it deserved. "What are we putting away this year?" the clerk would ask, and Mama would present her carefully selected items: a doll for the youngest, a football and a board game for the middle child, a jacket and a pair of sneakers for the oldest, who was growing so fast that clothes were more practical than toys. And maybe, if the math worked out, one bigger item, one special thing that would be the centerpiece of Christmas morning, the gift that would make the children gasp with surprise and delight. The clerk would calculate the total, would explain the terms, would write up the layaway agreement. There was a service fee, usually a few dollars, the price of the privilege of paying over time. There was a minimum deposit, typically 10 or 20% of the total. And there was a deadline, a date by which everything had to be paid in full, or the items would go back on the shelf and the money already paid would be lost. Mama would count out her bills, would sign her name, would receive her receipt. And then she would walk out of the store empty-handed, carrying nothing but a slip of paper and the knowledge that Christmas was now in motion, that the machinery of holiday joy had been set into operation, that all she had to do was keep making payments until the magic could be collected. Every Friday afternoon, Mama would make her pilgrimage. It happened right after work, or right after cashing the weekly check, or right after the money from the side hustle came through. The timing varied depending on circumstances, but the destination was always the same: the layaway counter at the back of the store, where the Christmas dreams were being held hostage until the ransom was paid in full. The children noticed these Friday disappearances, but they did not understand them. "Where's Mama going?" they would ask each other, and the oldest might shrug and say, "Probably the store." And that would be the end of the inquiry. Children are not naturally curious about the movements of their parents, especially when those movements do not directly affect them. They were more interested in what was on television, what was for dinner, whether they could go outside and play before the streetlights came on. But Mama knew that every Friday trip was a brick in the wall she was building, a step closer to the moment when she could walk into that store one final time and walk out with bags full of gifts instead of a receipt full of promises. She knew that the $5 she was paying today, and the $5 she would pay next week, and the $5 after that would eventually add up to the look on her children's faces on Christmas morning. That look was worth every sacrifice. That look was worth every Friday afternoon spent standing in line at the layaway counter instead of resting her tired feet at home. The line was always long during the holiday season. Other mothers, other fathers, other grandparents and aunts and uncles, all making their own pilgrimages, all carrying their own receipts, all paying their own installments on their own Christmas dreams. There was a kinship among the people in the layaway line, an unspoken understanding that they were all engaged in the same sacred work. They might nod to each other, might exchange small smiles, might comment on the weather or the length of the line or the rudeness of the clerk. But they didn't discuss what they were buying or for whom. The specifics of layaway were private, even among fellow travelers on the same journey. When Mama reached the front of the line, she would hand over her receipt and her payment. The clerk would update the record, would calculate the remaining balance, would hand back the receipt with the new amount written in pen. And Mama would study that number, would calculate how many more Fridays remained until Christmas, would do the math in her head to make sure everything would be paid off in time. Sometimes the math was tight. Sometimes it meant skipping a meal, or turning down the thermostat, or telling the children that there was no money for ice cream this week. Sometimes it meant working overtime, or taking on an extra shift, or selling something that could be sold to bring in a few extra dollars. But Mama always found a way. She always found a way because failure was not an option, because Christmas was coming whether the bills were paid or not, because her children deserved to wake up to presents under the tree like every other child in America. The hardest part of layaway was the secrecy. Christmas gifts are supposed to be surprises. That is the whole point of wrapping them, of hiding them, of telling children not to peek in the closet or shake the boxes under the tree. The surprise is what makes Christmas morning magical, what creates that moment of pure joy when the paper is torn away and the gift is revealed. But layaway required a deeper level of secrecy. It was not enough to hide the gifts themselves, because the gifts did not exist yet, not in any tangible sense. They existed only as items on a receipt, as products sitting in a back room somewhere, tagged with Mama's name and waiting to be claimed. The secrecy of layaway was the secrecy of the process itself, of the weekly payments, of the financial calculations, of the sacrifices being made in service of Christmas joy. Mama could not tell the children about layaway because children do not understand money, not really. They do not understand that the doll they want costs 2 weeks of grocery money, that the bicycle they dream about would require a month of overtime shifts, that Christmas itself is a luxury that some families cannot afford. To tell them about layaway would be to burden them with adult worries, to taint the magic of the holiday with the grim realities of economics. So Mama kept the secret. She hid the receipts in her purse, in her dresser drawer, in the pages of books the children would never read. She deflected questions about her Friday errands with vague answers and quick subject changes. She maintained the illusion that Christmas gifts appeared by magic, delivered by Santa Claus, or purchased casually with money that was always available, always abundant, always enough. This secrecy was exhausting. It required constant vigilance, constant deception, constant performance. Mama had to pretend that everything was fine, that money was no object, that the holidays were a time of plenty rather than a time of careful calculation and quiet desperation. She had to smile when she felt like crying, had to project confidence when she felt only anxiety, had to maintain the fiction of ease while carrying the weight of effort. But she did it. She did it because that was what mothers did. She did it because the joy on her children's faces was worth more than her own comfort. She did it because love, in the end, is not about what is easy, but about what is necessary. Let us pause here to consider the mathematics of layaway Christmas. Imagine a mother with 3 children. Imagine that she earns minimum wage or just above it, working as a nurse's aide or a housekeeper or a cashier at the grocery store. Imagine that after rent and utilities and food and transportation, there is very little left, perhaps $50 a week, perhaps less, to cover everything else that a family needs. Now imagine that this mother wants to give her children a Christmas they will remember. Not an extravagant Christmas, not a Christmas like the ones in the television commercials, but a decent Christmas, a respectable Christmas, a Christmas with presents under the tree and joy in the morning. She sits down with the catalog and the calculator. She assigns a budget to each child, let us say $30 apiece, which seems like a lot until you realize how quickly $30 disappears in a toy store. She selects gifts carefully, looking for value, looking for durability, looking for things that will bring lasting happiness rather than momentary excitement. For the youngest, she chooses a doll and a tea set, total cost $28. For the middle child, she chooses a board game and a football, total cost $25. For the oldest, she chooses a jacket that he needs and a model car kit that he wants, total cost $32. The grand total is $85, plus the layaway fee of $5, bringing the sum to $90. It sounds like nothing in an age when sneakers cost $200 and video game systems cost $500, and children expect to receive electronics that cost more than their parents earn in a week. But in the context of this mother's budget, $90 is enormous. It is nearly 2 weeks of surplus income, assuming there are no emergencies, no unexpected expenses, no shoes that wear out or cars that break down. So she puts the items on layaway in October, paying a deposit of $10. That leaves $80 to pay over the remaining weeks before Christmas. If she pays $10 a week, she will be finished with 2 weeks to spare. But $10 a week is a lot, so she plans to pay $5 most weeks and $10 when she can, stretching the payments out until the very last moment, praying that nothing goes wrong between now and then. This is the mathematics of layaway Christmas. This is the arithmetic of love, the calculation of sacrifice, the budgeting of hope. It is not glamorous, it is not romantic, but it is real. And it is the reality that millions of mothers faced every holiday season, doing the math that would make their children's dreams come true. Mama was not alone in her layaway journey. All around her, in houses and apartments throughout the neighborhood, other mothers were making the same calculations, standing in the same lines, carrying the same secrets. They saw each other at the store, these women, and they recognized each other even if they didn't speak. There was a look that layaway mothers shared, a combination of determination and exhaustion and quiet pride. They were warriors in a battle that no one else could see, fighting to give their children a taste of the American dream, even when that dream seemed designed to exclude them. Sometimes they helped each other. A neighbor might offer to drive Mama to the store when her car was broken, might watch the children while Mama made her Friday pilgrimage, might lend a few dollars when the budget came up short and the deadline was approaching. This was the community of struggle, the network of mutual aid that existed in black neighborhoods where everyone understood that survival required cooperation, that no one could make it entirely on their own. At church on Sundays, the mothers would exchange glances that communicated volumes. "How is your layaway going? Are you going to make it? Is there anything I can do to help?" These questions were asked with eyebrows and nods and slight movements of the hand, a silent language developed by people who knew better than to discuss financial matters out loud, who had learned that pride required certain things to remain private even among friends. The men understood too, in their own way. The fathers and grandfathers and uncles knew that the women were engaged in mysterious Christmas preparations, and they knew better than to ask too many questions. Their job was to contribute what they could to the household funds, to work the overtime shifts and the side jobs that would help fill the gap, to trust that the women would handle the rest as they always had. This was the division of labor in many black households during the layaway era. The men earned and the women managed. The men brought home the bacon and the women decided how it would be sliced. It was not a perfect system, and it was not without its tensions and resentments, but it worked well enough to get millions of families through millions of Christmases. For all the determination and sacrifice that went into layaway Christmas, there was always an undercurrent of fear. The fear that something would go wrong, the fear that the money would run out, the fear that all those weeks of payments would be for nothing, that the gifts would have to be returned to the shelf, that Christmas morning would arrive with nothing under the tree. This fear was not irrational. It was based on experience, on the knowledge that life in a black household was full of unexpected expenses and unforeseen disasters. A child might get sick and require medicine that insurance did not cover. A car might break down and require repairs that could not be postponed. A job might be lost. A shift might be cut. A paycheck might be smaller than expected. Any of these things could derail the carefully constructed budget, could leave Mama scrambling to find money that did not exist, could force impossible choices between paying the layaway and paying the electric bill, between Christmas presents and Christmas dinner. Mama lived with this fear every day between October and December. She carried it with her to work, brought it home with her at night, lay awake thinking about it when she should have been sleeping. She developed contingency plans in her mind, backup schemes that might or might not work, desperate measures that she hoped she would never have to employ. What if she sold the television? What if she asked her sister for a loan? What if she took on a second job just for a few weeks, just long enough to make up the difference? What if she went to the church and asked for help from the benevolence fund? What if, God forbid, she had to choose which children would get presents and which would have to understand that this year was different? These thoughts were torture, but Mama could not escape them. They were the price of wanting something better for her children, of refusing to accept that poverty meant a joyless Christmas, of insisting that her family deserved the same magic that richer families took for granted. And then, at last, the final Friday would arrive. By December 20th or so, with Christmas only days away, the layaway had to be paid in full and the items collected. The stores had deadlines printed clearly on the receipts, and missing those deadlines meant losing everything: the gifts, the payments, the weeks of sacrifice that had brought Mama to this point. On that final Friday, Mama would count her money one more time. She would calculate the remaining balance, would make sure she had enough, would pray that the numbers added up correctly. And then she would make her last pilgrimage to the layaway counter, carrying with her the sum total of all those weekly payments, ready at last to claim what she had been working toward for months. The line was always longest on the final days before Christmas. Everyone was making their last payments, everyone was collecting their items, everyone was running out of time. The wait might be an hour or more, but Mama did not mind. She had waited this long. She could wait a little longer. When she reached the counter, she would hand over her receipt and her final payment. The clerk would check the records, would confirm that the balance was zero, would disappear into the back room where the layaway items were stored. And then the clerk would return with bags, with boxes, with the physical manifestation of all those weeks of sacrifice. Mama would take the bags and the boxes, would feel their weight in her hands, would experience a moment of pure triumph. She had done it. Against all odds, against all obstacles, against the daily struggle of being black and poor in America, she had done it. Her children would have presents on Christmas morning. The magic would be maintained for another year. Walking out of the store with those bags, Mama would feel lighter than she had felt in months. The burden of layaway, the weight of secrecy and fear and constant calculation would lift from her shoulders. There was still work to do, wrapping to complete, hiding places to find. But the hardest part was over. The mission was accomplished. With the layaway collected, a new challenge arose. Where to hide the gifts until Christmas? In small apartments and crowded houses, hiding places were scarce. Children were curious and resourceful, always looking for clues about what Christmas might bring, always tempted to peek where they were not supposed to peek. Mama had to be creative, had to find spots that would escape detection, had to outthink the natural investigative instincts of her offspring. The classic hiding spots were all too obvious. Under the bed was the first place children looked. The back of the closet was the second. The top shelf of the hallway closet was the third. Any mother who relied on these locations was inviting discovery, was practically guaranteeing that the Christmas surprise would be ruined before December 25th arrived. So Mama developed alternative strategies. She might hide the gifts at a neighbor's house, retrieving them on Christmas Eve after the children were asleep. She might store them in the trunk of the car, which children were less likely to investigate. She might find a spot in the basement or the attic, some corner that children had no reason to visit. She might even wrap the gifts in misleading paper, labeling them with fake names or fake contents, trusting that the disguise would hold until the moment of revelation. The wrapping itself was an art form. Mama might wait until the children were in bed and then stay up late into the night, spreading out paper and ribbon and tape on the kitchen table, working quietly so as not to wake anyone. Or she might take the gifts to a friend's house and wrap them there, away from prying eyes and curious questions. The paper was usually simple, bought in bulk from the dollar store or repurposed from previous years. But Mama took care with the wrapping anyway, making sure the corners were crisp and the ribbon was curled, because presentation mattered, because Christmas gifts should look like Christmas gifts, because her children deserved the full experience even if the budget could not accommodate fancy paper and elaborate bows. Christmas Eve was the night when everything came together. The children would be bathed and dressed in their Christmas pajamas, the ones that were saved all year for this specific occasion. They would be fed an early dinner, something simple that did not require much preparation, because Mama had other things on her mind. They would be read the Christmas story from the Bible, or shown a Christmas special on television, or allowed to open one small gift as a preview of the morning to come. And then finally, they would be sent to bed. "Go to sleep," Mama would say, her voice firm but loving. "Santa won't come if you're awake." The children would protest that they were not tired, that they could not possibly sleep, that the excitement was too much to bear. But eventually, worn down by the day and the anticipation, they would drift off, their dreams full of presents and magic and the promise of morning. That was when Mama's real work began. She would wait until the house was quiet, until the only sounds were the children's breathing and the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. Then she would retrieve the hidden gifts, would carry them silently to the living room, would arrange them under the tree or around the tree or wherever they would look most impressive when the children came running in at dawn. This was the moment Mama had been working toward for months. This was the culmination of all those Friday trips to the layaway counter, all those careful calculations, all those sacrifices that would never be mentioned and never be acknowledged. She would stand back and look at the presents arranged under the tree, and she would feel a satisfaction that went beyond words. It was not much, not by the standards of wealthier families, not by the standards of the commercials and the catalogs, but it was hers. She had earned it. She had made it happen through sheer force of will and the determination to give her children something beautiful. Sometimes, standing there in the dark, Mama would cry. Not from sadness, but from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming emotion of having completed an impossible task. The tears would fall quietly, and she would wipe them away, and then she would go to bed, ready for the morning that would make everything worthwhile. The children always woke early. 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, sometimes even earlier, the excitement too powerful to allow for normal sleep. They would creep out of their beds, would whisper to each other in the hallway, would try to peek into the living room without being caught. "Go back to bed," Mama might shout from her room, hearing their movements. "It's too early." But eventually, when the sky began to lighten or when the clock reached some agreed-upon hour, the children would be released. They would burst into the living room like a dam breaking, would see the presents arranged under the tree, would gasp with wonder and delight and pure, uncomplicated joy. "Santa came!" the youngest would shout, as if there had ever been any doubt, as if the magic could have possibly failed. And then the unwrapping would begin. Paper would fly, ribbons would be tossed aside, boxes would be torn open with an eagerness that bordered on violence. And with each gift revealed, there would be exclamations of happiness, of gratitude, of the simple pleasure that comes from receiving something you wanted. Mama would watch from her chair, a cup of coffee in her hands, exhaustion in her bones but joy in her heart. She would see the doll being hugged by the youngest, the football being tossed between the middle child's hands, the jacket being tried on by the oldest. She would see her children happy, genuinely happy, and she would know that everything she had done was worth it. They would never know about the layaway. They would never know about the Friday trips and the weekly payments and the fear that had kept Mama awake at night. They would never know how close things had come or how much had been sacrificed to make this morning possible. They would simply believe that Christmas was magic, that presents appeared by some combination of Santa Claus and parental love, that joy was free and abundant and available to everyone. That was exactly as Mama wanted it. That was the whole point of the secrecy, the sacrifice, the endless effort. Her children deserved to believe in magic. They deserved to experience Christmas without the weight of adult worries. They deserved this one morning of pure, unadulterated happiness, and Mama had moved heaven and earth to give it to them. Years later, when the children had grown and the layaway era had passed into history, they would look back on those Christmas mornings and understand what they had not understood at the time. They would remember the doll, but they would also remember the look on Mama's face as they unwrapped it. They would remember the bicycle, but they would also remember how Mama had insisted on watching them ride it up and down the sidewalk, her eyes shining with pride and satisfaction. They would remember the jacket, but they would also remember how Mama had fussed over the fit, adjusting the collar and smoothing the shoulders, making sure her child looked just right. The gifts themselves, they would come to realize, were not what mattered most. The toys would break and be discarded. The clothes would be outgrown and donated. The games would be played until they were boring and then forgotten. But the love behind the gifts, the sacrifice that made them possible, the determination of a mother who refused to let poverty rob her children of Christmas magic, that would endure forever. Some of those children, now adults with children of their own, would continue the layaway tradition. They would stand in the same lines their mothers had stood in, would make the same calculations, would experience the same fear and the same triumph. They would understand, finally, what it felt like to be on the other side of Christmas morning, to be the one who made the magic happen rather than the one who simply received it. Others would find themselves in better circumstances, able to pay for Christmas gifts all at once, able to shop without the need for layaway plans and weekly payments. But they would never forget where they came from. They would never take for granted the presents under their tree, because they knew what presents had cost their mothers, what sacrifices had been made in their names. And every Christmas morning, as they watched their own children tear into their own presents, they would think of their mothers. They would think of the layaway counter and the Friday trips and the hidden gifts and the careful wrapping. They would think of the love that had been paid in installments, the devotion that had been demonstrated through sacrifice, the magic that had been created through sheer force of will. They would think of their mothers, and they would be grateful. The layaway era did not end all at once. It faded gradually as credit cards became more accessible and online shopping replaced trips to the mall, as the stores that had been the temples of layaway closed their doors and went out of business. K-Mart, which had once been the layaway capital of America, filed for bankruptcy and began closing locations. Sears, the catalog king that had defined Christmas shopping for generations, suffered the same fate. Woolworth disappeared entirely, its lunch counters and toy departments and layaway counters becoming nothing more than memories in the minds of those old enough to remember them. The layaway counter, that sacred space where mothers had made their offerings and collected their rewards, became an artifact of a different age. Some stores still offered layaway programs, but they were not the same. The clerks did not know your name. The lines did not hold the same sense of community. The experience had been rationalized and digitized and stripped of its human dimension. The mothers who had stood in those lines grew old, and many of them passed on. They left behind children and grandchildren who carried the memory of layaway Christmas in their hearts, who told stories about the old days to their own children, who tried to explain what it had been like to receive a gift that had been paid for $5 at a time over the course of months. But something was lost when layaway faded, something valuable, something irreplaceable. The forced savings, the delayed gratification, the discipline of weekly payments, these had taught lessons that credit cards and online shopping could not teach. They had taught that good things come to those who wait, that sacrifice is the price of love, that magic is not free but must be earned through effort and determination. The children who grew up with layaway understood these lessons in their bones, even if they could not articulate them. They knew that their Christmas presents had been purchased with more than money. They had been purchased with time and effort and worry and love. That knowledge shaped them, made them who they were, gave them an appreciation for sacrifice that would inform their entire lives. In closets and attics and boxes of memorabilia throughout America, there are still layaway receipts. Faded slips of paper, the ink barely legible after decades in storage, documenting purchases that were made before many of us were born. These receipts are not valuable in any conventional sense. They cannot be sold or traded or exchanged for goods and services. They are simply pieces of paper, remnants of transactions that were completed long ago, evidence of gifts that were given and received and eventually discarded. But for the families that keep them, these receipts are priceless. They are proof that the layaway era really happened, that the sacrifices really occurred, that the love really existed. They are tangible connections to mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers who are no longer with us, physical evidence of the devotion that made Christmas possible for generations of Black children. When family members gather at holidays, these receipts are sometimes brought out and passed around. "Look at this," an elderly aunt might say, holding up a slip of paper from 1978. "This is from when your grandmother bought you that doll. She paid on it for 3 months." And the now grown child, perhaps a grandparent herself by now, will look at the receipt with wonder and reverence. She will see the faded numbers, the careful handwriting of the layaway clerk, the record of payments made in $5 increments. She will think of her grandmother, long gone but never forgotten, and she will understand for the first time, or perhaps the 100th time, just how much she was loved. These receipts are the archives of layaway Christmas. They are the documentation of a tradition that shaped millions of lives, that demonstrated what Black mothers were willing to do for their children, that proved that love could be paid in installments even when everything else had to be paid in full. The layaway counter is gone. K-Mart is gone. The mothers who stood in those lines are, many of them, gone too. But the love that was paid in installments remains. It remains in the memories of those who lived through the layaway era. It remains in the values and habits and perspectives that were passed down from generation to generation. It remains in the understanding that Christmas is not about the gifts under the tree, but about the love that put them there. Every year, as December approaches and the holiday season begins, there are still mothers who worry. They worry about money, about budgets, about whether they will be able to give their children the Christmas they deserve. The layaway counter may be gone, but the struggle remains. The mathematics of holiday love still requires solving. The sacrifices still need to be made. But those mothers are not alone. They stand in a tradition that stretches back through generations, a tradition of black mothers who refuse to let circumstances dictate their children's joy. They carry with them the spirits of all the women who came before, the women who stood in layaway lines and made weekly payments and kept secrets and wrapped gifts in the dark of Christmas Eve. Those women are watching. Those women are proud. Those women are cheering from wherever they are now, saying, "You can do it, baby. I know it's hard. I know you're tired. I know you're scared, but you can do it. I did it. Your grandmother did it. Your great-grandmother did it. We all did it, and so can you." Layaway. Christmas was never about the merchandise. It was never about the dolls or the footballs or the jackets or the bicycles. It was about love, pure and simple. It was about mothers who were willing to do whatever it took to give their children happiness. It was about the magic that exists not in packages under trees, but in the hearts of those who sacrifice everything for the people they love. That magic cannot be bought. It cannot be placed on layaway. It cannot be paid for in installments, but it can be passed down from mother to daughter to granddaughter through the generations forever and ever, world without end. This is the legacy of Layaway Christmas. This is the love that was paid in installments. This is the gift that keeps on giving, long after the receipts have faded and the stores have closed and the mothers have gone to their rest. Merry Christmas, Mama. Thank you for everything you paid for. Thank you for everything you sacrificed. Thank you for the magic you created, week after week, year after year. We understand now. We finally understand.